Hello everyone, welcome back to Cisco Live. You're in Splunk for Network Engineers. It's great to see so many people out in the audience today. Who here is on the network side of the fence? Quite a few. Anyone on the Splunk side? Not so many. How about both? A couple. Oh, more than a couple. Cool. All right, so when I was thinking about creating this session, what I wanted to be able to do as I myself got to learn Splunk a lot more is to be able to, how do I configure the Splunk? And how do I configure the enterprise networking products that we use? So there are a lot of the products that we're going to be talking about today. How do I get them working together? Because I find that the network folk already know all the network tools and their products. Splunk tends to know the Splunk side very well, but it's maybe not so easy to get them to integrate together, shall we say. So all the sessions have a WebEx space. Please join a WebEx space to ask your questions. Now, if you're following on from the PDF version in the slides, I've noticed that there's a lot of the hidden slides aren't there. So I've actually got quite a lot of content today. So I'm going to put in the WebEx space after the session a copy of the PDF slides again, but with the unhidden slides, also with the hidden slides already in the deck. So you can follow on and actually get it going for some of the things that we aren't able to talk about today. And please ask your questions in the WebEx space as well, or you can just raise your hands and we'll get to them today as well. So this is me, JeffLee. Been in the networking industry for well over 20 years now, so it's sort of showing my age a little bit. Most recently, 6 years specialising in the enterprise networking. So that's your routing, your switching, your wireless, as well as all the products that we're going to be talking about today and integrating into Splunk. So your Catalyst Center, Meraki dashboard, ICE, SD-WAN, etc. Back when I was younger, I used to do a lot of cycling. I used to do a lot of competitive cycling. So up on the screen there is what I've sort of migrated to, because I'm obviously not as fit as what I was before. This is virtual reality racing. And I'm a little bit of a telemetry geek. I love all the telemetry that you can get out of the systems here, even on the exercise. So up on the screen, I can get things like cadence, which is not very useful. I can get things like heart rate, which is not too bad. And the latest in the cycling world is power, which has been around for quite a while now. And as you know, a picture tells 1,000 words. All I can tell from this picture is that I'm pretty unfit. I've got a long way to go, even if I want to get back to my previous self. So I do a lot of this in the winter when it's a little bit, the weather's a little bit iffy in Melbourne, much like it is today. But otherwise, I get outside. In winter as well, I like to try and get out to the ski fields, do a little bit of skiing. So obviously not as good a skier as what I'm a cyclist. The agenda today, so I'm not going to read everything in the agenda, but what we're going to do is just going to give a little bit of an introduction into Splunk, and then I'm going to show the installation steps as well as how to install and integrate all the applications from the networking side into Splunk. And then we're going to finish off with Splunk IT Service Intelligence, which you may or may not have heard of. So my assumptions today, I think it's pretty accurate. Most of the folk are in the network space. You're probably generally familiar with things like Catalyst Center, Meraki, Identity Services Engine, SD-WAN. You don't have to know all of those products in depth. We're just going to be covering a lot of those systems anyway as we integrate. You may be less familiar with systems like or applications like Thousand Eyes, which is perfectly okay. Less familiar with Splunk, and you probably even never heard of ITSI or IT Service Intelligence from Splunk. It's probably a fair call. So let's start with why Splunk. Splunk gives us that ability to have a consolidated view, consolidated dashboards from the many services and many sets of infrastructure that we have in our environment, right? So we'll be able to see from these common sets of events and security. It gives us the ability to empower our network, our NetOps and our SecOps. On top of that, we're able to have a layer of AI across the Splunk system as well. And that sort of culminates in this session with Splunk ITSI. Now, Splunk itself, Splunk comes with Splunk Enterprise generally, or Splunk Cloud, so on-prem or in the cloud. Splunk also has a very modular aspect to it. So it literally comes with an app store called Splunkbase. So I can install applications from Splunkbase and get enhanced functionality out of Splunk and my systems to be able to visualize and search data. Our first aspect is actually getting data into Splunk. So you know when even you have the same vendor, I may have syslog from my routers and switches. It's actually probably quite different than my security devices. Or if I have multiple vendors, anyone here has got multi-vendor strategy in place? The logging and information coming from those systems is really quite different. So I can take data from multiple different systems, whether they be things, users, whether they be your wireless routing, your switching. All of this data is usually in a different format. Even like the timestamp or date is quite typically in a different format as well. So in Splunk, I come into Splunk and I normalize all of those events and metrics, alerts and logs, and they end up in a common data repository in Splunk. And then I can do things like search for it in a consistent way, display data or display dashboards in a consistent and consolidated way where I have all the information coming from a different set of systems and display it in something that is meaningful for my business. So it's about realizing those business outcomes in what we like to call a common dashboard or a common set of dashboards. So there are three main Splunk components that I want to talk about, right? And when I install Splunk Enterprise or Splunk Cloud, typically this runs on the one system, but as I expand out, I can separate these components for scale and to be able to scale out my system in order for what I need to use it for. So the first component that I want to talk about is forwarders, and these really come in two flavors. We have a universal forwarder. A universal forwarder, I like to think of that as really a lightweight agent that is sitting on your system. So maybe it's an agent running on your Windows servers. Its job is to take those, for example, Windows events and send them into the Splunk instance in a particular index, typically. The other one is a heavy forwarder, and this is more like a full Splunk Enterprise application that receives data, advanced data. I may be able to do some processing on that data before I send it into the Splunk index, because you may not want to be able to you may not want to collect every single piece of data from that system in order to send it onwards to Splunk. Now, indexes are like, I like to call it like a bucket of information that you can use in Splunk, right? And typically we have more than one index in use. So in our system that we're going to show here is that I'm going to have an index for Catalyst, I'm going to have an index for Meraki, for example, an index for NetFlow. It does a couple of things. There's one, it enables me when I go and search, I can actually specify that index, and then I can go have much more efficient searches just related to that data. So it's a way of separating the data out, make the whole system a lot more efficient. The other component is the search head, and this is basically where me as an operator interacts with Splunk. So I log on to the web UI, that's my search head, and I can conduct searches from the search head and display my dashboards in that aspect. So basically, it's a way that efficiently separates out those major components for me to be able to go and interrogate my data, and then it gets the information from the various indexes and displays them in a way that is meaningful for my business. So here's an example of one of the applications that we're going to install, and we're going to go a little bit more into applications in a minute. Previously, Cisco had a separate application for SD-WAN. It had a separate application for ICE, a separate application for Cybervision and Catalyst Center. In the new architecture of the Catalyst app, what it does, it combines all of these applications in one application, has a common format for data for it to be represented back into Splunk, ends up in Splunk as data, and then I have a separate application that can visualize my dashboards. We're going to go and have a look at what that looks like from an architecture point of view in a second. So this is some of the dashboards that, as a sample, you can use just from the enterprise networking app that we'll see installed. So on the one side, I've just got the network insights. It's showing us metrics, a high-level summary of the metrics coming in from the different systems. So you can see here that it's not necessarily one ICE or one SD-WAN or one Catalyst Center. So it combines all of the different widgets as an enterprise networking app. You can even go and select, oh, I just want to see my ICE events, or I just want to see my Catalyst Center events. But there are various dashboards up there that you can amalgamate information and display it out. The one on the right there is just around endpoints, as an example. So I'm displaying my metrics, my health score. I can see, if you can see there up at the Catalyst Center, I've got a drop-down list. So if I have more than one Catalyst Center, for example, or more than one ICE, I can go just select those particular, in that particular instance and display those particular results. So that's just an example of some of the dashboards. We're going to go into a little bit more detail in a second. So I wanted to show you, like, how do we get started? How do we actually install Splunk? How do we get it going with all the data? And my idea here was, as network folk and Splunk folk, how to get the two talk together, right? So I wanted it easy for you can have one place to be able to go and see all this information, to be able to go and configure the application so that you can get it going in a pilot environment, or if you have separate Splunk teams, for them to be able to get a little bit of knowledge about how to make things work together from our networking side. So it's fairly straightforward. I've got two screenshots, one Windows on the left and Linux on the right-hand side. So I'm using a CentOS system here. It's very straightforward. You can download Splunk, get a trial account. It gives you 60 days, I think, with 500 meg of data a day to play with. So you can actually test these systems in your own infrastructure and see what it looks like. Or you can integrate in with your existing Splunk instance as we go. But this is how you install it. It's fairly straightforward. You simply just download the executables. You install it on the systems. There's one thing that I like to do on the Linux side, at least, and that's to enable auto start. So your Ubuntu systems, your Debian, your CentOS systems all use systemd. It's great to be able to go and, if I want to do operating system upgrades and things like that, is to enable it to auto start. On the Windows side, it's a lot easier. It just it's already handled as part of the Windows service. I've got some examples there how to start and stop manually. So to stop it, it's the executable for Splunk and stop. In order to convert it to the systemd, the command's up there on the screen. And then I can then start it as a service, and then you don't need to worry about it anymore. Now, when you install Splunk, especially on Windows and CentOS at least, all the ports are blocked. So Splunk listens on port 8000, so I need to go and open it up, port 8000 for a start. Ubuntu is a little bit easier. I don't think it naturally firewalls any ports, so it's already open. And then I also tend to open up port 8088, which is the HTTP event collector. So we're going to be talking about the event collector in a minute in a lot more detail, but they're the two, I would say, minimum ports that you want to open up. Now, I've got two UDP ports in there as well, 5513 and 5515 as an example. And you might be asking, why do I do that? The reason why I do that is Splunk will listen on a port for data, right? So there's those UDP ports there, 5513 and 5515. Now, I use it because maybe I want all my Catalyst switching devices to be receiving syslog on 5513. And I may have, say, all my SD-WAN devices receiving logs on 5515. Now, what that means is that when I go and conduct my searches, it's very easy for me to go and have a look and disseminate between my SD-WAN devices and my Catalyst devices. So these are just two examples. You'll need to go and open up the ports that you need that you're actually listening on. But I like to add more than one port, even if it is, for example, syslog, because then I can very easily differentiate what that looks like. So Splunkbase, the App Store, talks about technology add-ons. Sometimes they're called technical add-ons, and then we confuse it a little bit more by sometimes we call it apps as well. So apps, technology add-ons, they're the same but different. What it tends to be, the apps tend to contain the dashboard components. The add-ons tend to be able to ingest the data and formalize it in a way that you can reuse it in Splunk. So if you go to splunkbase.splunk.com, there are Splunk supported apps, there are community apps, there are paid for version apps, but you get it all on splunkbase.com. I'll show you how to install it in a second. But the idea is it's an easy way to go and extend Splunk to collect data, format data, display it in the ways that you need to for your business. Right, so we're going to explore the Catalyst add-on first. And this is the app that I showed up on the screen a little bit earlier. This is what the architecture looks like. And this sort of shows some of the methods that I can use to get data into Splunk. So I've got the Catalyst add-on on the left there. Now the Catalyst add-on I can configure to go get data from REST API. So for example, Catalyst Center the Catalyst add-on will go get data from Catalyst via REST API. It'll do the same for Cybervision. The other ways that I can get data into Splunk is I can send syslog. So SD-WAN can send syslog to Splunk through the Catalyst add-on. I can send the Catalyst switches, for example, syslog. ICE can come in through syslog. And on the right there is the enhanced NetFlow add-on. So these are what is generally considered some of the prerequisites if you read the documentation of how to install these add-ons. So the Catalyst Enhanced NetFlow add-on obviously receives NetFlow data, but if you're doing things like high-speed logging in SD-WAN, that comes through as NetFlow as well. So those two components work together. It ends up in Splunk, and then there's a separate application to go and visualize that data. So this is what it looks like on the install page. There's generally two ways to go and install an application or an add-on. Under the Splunk menu, under Apps, there's the Browse More Apps. This is what I'm showing here. Or you can install it from a file. We'll see that in a second with just downloading. But essentially, Browse More Apps, I've searched for Catalyst add-on here. It comes up as an install button or widget on the screen. I click install. It's going to prompt me for my Splunk credentials. And essentially, that's it. It's installed, right? Now, how do we get the data in? That's the bit that we'll talk about as we go through. So this is the other way. This is the prerequisites, and if you go to these actual links in the PDF, it will take you to all of the actual pages that you can get. You can download them, and then it's up to you whether you want to install it as a particular file or you want to do it the first way that I showed you. All right. But when I go and install the Stream app, so this is what I wanted to share, is there's some of the things that you might encounter as you go and set up your particular environment. So up here, you might get this error message that I can't detect my stream. The way to fix it is to put the host name in this file. So it brings up two points in here. So what we're looking at in this setting here is the local settings under system. So Splunk, whether you're talking about installing Splunk Enterprise or you're talking about the applications, always have a local directory. My recommendation is that you either create this file or you copy the file from the default directory and you edit the local directory or the local file. The reason is that when you go and upgrade Splunk or you go and upgrade the application, it's not going to touch anything in the local file itself. So these contains all your settings, all of the tweaks that you do on your local instance. When you go and upgrade Splunk or the application, it's going to wipe everything else out, but it's going to leave that local directory untouched. All right. The other part that you'll get when you go and run through the Stream app is that I need to fix permissions. Now, if you're not familiar with Linux, it's just a matter of making the file executable so you can run it. You run the file or you run the application, and then what you'll end up is this screen on the bottom here. Now, I've found that the easiest way to get the NetFlow component going is then you take this output and then you run it on a separate Linux box. So this would be analogous to like a heavy forwarder. So what will happen is that the NetFlow will come into the heavy forwarder, and then you configure the heavy forwarder to send it over to Splunk through the HTTP event collector. Now, in the hidden slides, it shows you how to go and do that and what that actually means. But we'll explore the HTTP event collector in upcoming slides as well. But I find that's the easiest way to get to receive the NetFlow data if you're into the visualization, the NetFlow. Right, so we've done the prerequisites. The next steps are to configure the Catalyst add-on, which is for the data part, and the Enterprise Networking add-on, which is for the visualization of your data. And then I'm going to show you a couple of other things that we do that don't necessarily or aren't really talked about in the documentation around the webhooks. All right, so first up, the Catalyst add-on. So remember, that's the way that I want to be able to go and parse the data, get the data into Splunk. The Enterprise Networking is the way that is presented in dashboards. So the two apps are just down the bottom there. So first up, so remember, we talked a little bit about indexes earlier on, right? We have not just one index. If you go and install Splunk, it's got a concept of a default index, which is usually main. What we do is when we're going to create an index, which is best practice, right? It allows you to go and search it a lot easier. It's much more efficient. But I also need to tell the dashboards how to go and visualize the data. It's by default looking in the default, which is main. So that is done by a search macro. So generally what I need to do is go and update one place, the search macro, and I want to say index in Catalyst. If I've got multiple indexes that I'm going to be using, then I can just put a comma and say Catalyst and maybe something else. But the first bit is to go create an index and then go tell my dashboards how to get that index to display the correct data. Catalyst add-on, you're going to get these 4 tiles, as we mentioned, SD-WAN, ICE, Catalyst Center, and Cybervision. The way that you configure the applications are generally very similar. Essentially, you click on the configure application. So if you're not using Cybervision, so we're not going to be using Cybervision in this presentation, you just don't click it, you don't configure it, it's not going to show in the dashboards, it generally doesn't matter. So let's have a look at the Catalyst Center components to it. So this is still on the Splunk side. In the configuration, I just put my credentials in. So I hope you notice up here that I've got more than one Catalyst Center. So an advantage of Splunk is that it doesn't really matter how many Catalyst Centers I have, I can still receive that data from those environments and display it. And then on the example on the right, I can configure my inputs. So I've just got a drop-down list of some of the inputs that you can, or all of the inputs that you can configure, rather. So different types of health, compliance, et cetera, et cetera. So, I mean, that's the Splunk side. What do we do on the Catalyst side, or the Catalyst Center side? This is what I wanted to also bring to the fore. It's great configuring the dashboards, but it's no point if I'm not getting any data coming into those dashboards, right? So I'm in Catalyst Center. I'm in the design, network settings, and telemetry. Now, I've got up here a telemetry broker, and that's just a way that I receive all of the data into a central location. And in my lab, what I have is I've got a Splunk prod instance, a Splunk dev instance. So I can use the telemetry broker to receive it in one place and send it out to multiple. So you probably don't need that. So in here, up the top, you would send that or this information to your Splunk instance. You can simply add multiple syslog servers here. And then when you provision your network devices, it's also going to send syslog to Catalyst Center and also to Splunk. On the application visibility side, so that's all my NetFlow stuff, I am using a telemetry broker here, but otherwise you would have to template an exporter into Splunk. So this just makes that side a little bit cleaner. That way my application visibility comes into Catalyst Center and it also comes into Splunk. Now, we don't really talk about how we get events from Catalyst Center into Splunk. So this is the way to do it, right? So Splunk, I can receive data on a particular port. In our first example, that was 5513, 5515. In the HTTP event collector is also a way to receive data into Splunk. It's a very efficient way of getting data. It listens on port 8088. So the first, and it's secure as well. So the first part that I need to do in the data imports, in the HTTP event collector, I create one. In this example, it's called catc-heck. And then I have this thing in a box here that is the token. So it's like a password that I need to configure on the Catalyst Center side so that they can know how to authenticate to each other. So on Catalyst Center, I now need to configure a webhook. And the webhook is a specific format. In the authorization header, I need to say it's authorization, and then I need the keyword Splunk, I need a space, and then I need the token. So that's the first part that I need to configure on the webhook, and that's done on Catalyst Center, your external services in settings. The next bit is I need to send a destination webhook. So I've got an example here of showing, I'm showing a raw webhook data going towards Splunk. So on the right-hand side, I've just got a reminder here that we're listening on port 8088, and then I'm sending the destination to Splunk in that particular format. So it's the IP address of my Splunk server, it's the port number, and I'm sending it as a raw format. And then you can create your webhook and subscribe to your notifications. So your notifications might be device down or some sort of client information that I want to receive from Catalyst Center. In reality, there are hundreds of notifications that you can actually subscribe to. You don't need to subscribe to all of them. So on the ICE side, it's relatively similar. I'll point out the difference. So again, you put in your credentials for your ICE server, but it's going to create a pxgrid username on your ICE pxgrid server. So when you do that, under your clients in your ICE for pxgrid, you need to make sure that it's enabled, otherwise this won't work. By default, ICE is probably set to, I'm not going to approve clients as they come in. So you need to make sure that they're enabled. And then there's two sets of imports. There's one on the screen here, which is syslog. So here's the 5513 that maps to earlier where I opened up that port. This goes and automatically creates a data import for a UDP listener on Splunk. The other way to do it is you manually create that itself, but in the latest version of the TA, it goes and creates that automatically. And you can see here the import source type, it's automatically formatted. So I'm already listening, I'm already formatting the data to listen or to configure it as Cisco, ICE, and syslog. So then when I go and search for it later, if I want to, I know where I'm going to be getting it from ICE. And then I just specify my index. The other imports, so these are already built into the ICE. So again, I specify my index, and then I want to receive things like my security group tags, authorizations, hits, etc. And then on the bottom right-hand side, that's just an example of showing what I've got for that particular ICE instance. Again, I can do more than one ICE here, right? And then in my dashboards, I can select which ICE that I want to look at. So then, how do I configure on the ICE side, right? So in one aspect, it's API or pxgrid, but on the other aspect, it's syslog from ICE, and I can get a whole heap of information even around performance of ICE by just doing this. So I need to define a remote logging target of my Splunk server, right? So that's my 11.60. Then there's three things that I want you to go and configure as well. So one is the maximum length, because some of the log messages may be quite large, especially if I'm also including alarm definitions in there as well. So change that to 8192, which is the maximum. I want to include alarms and comply with RFC 3164. Then I just subscribe to my log target, my Splunk instance. So under the various logging categories, I just add Splunk in there. And then automatically that's already going to Splunk. And an example here is I'm just searching for the index of Catalyst and my source type of Cisco, ICE, and syslog, and I can start to see as a test information coming through already. On the SD-WAN side, it's relatively simple. I just give it my IP address of my SD-WAN manager. I put in my credentials. Again, my input type for syslog, this is going to create the port 5515 in Splunk itself. I've got a different port because I want to be able to differentiate of what's going on in my, when I go and visualize that Splunk data. And the input source type is Cisco firewall log, so I'm already getting information formatted to that type. The imports are slightly different on SD-WAN, obviously, so all of the TAs are very tailored to what application that they want. I just subscribe to my Catalyst index, and then I'm just picking up the health type for the site, the tunnel health, and my SSE tunnels. And then on the right-hand side, that's what my input should look like when I've finished this. Now, I've just got a quick example of what it looks like in SD-WAN. So this is UX 2.0. And if I am listening on a separate port for my syslog, I need to be able to send it to that particular port. So here's an example through a CLI template that I've just subscribed to the VRF, and I'm sending it to that particular port, 5515. And on the collector side, I'm just sending my my NetFlow telemetry and over to my Splunk instance. So that's how to do it on that particular side. From there, what we get is on the left just a raw data coming in. And when I go and have a look at it in the Enterprise Networking app, I have it on the screen there where I'm looking at the site health and the link health, and then it populates the information down on the bottom of the screen. So there are other dashboards that you can look in SD-WAN as well, but this is just an example. Okay, now Meraki, there's a separate Meraki add-on for Splunk. So that's the app down the bottom. Now, I've got a list of the inputs that are partially shown here. In the latest app, there's about 40 that you can configure. But there's a call out here on the Meraki side that don't be too aggressive in your interval that you want to go get information from Meraki. What I'm showing here is the API that it goes and gets information from Meraki via the API, and the Meraki dashboard has an API limit. So you don't want to be too aggressive on the Splunk side to go get information from Meraki, because otherwise you'll just get a 429 error that basically says, I've hit my Meraki dashboard API limit. So just be careful here. So similar, I go and create another index, and I go and tell the dashboard how to search for it. So that's saying Meraki index, I want to search for the Meraki index in the search macro. Very simple after that. I add my organizational details. I need my organization ID, which is typically at the bottom of the dashboard page, and my API key. And then away you go. You can create, it goes and creates the inputs automatically. You just need to turn them on. Here's an example of some of the dashboards. So in this TA, the dashboards and the configuration of it is in the same application, if you like. So here's an example of looking at temperature and I think noise data coming from the Meraki sensors. And down the bottom here is an example of a dashboard where I want to know how those devices are connecting to dashboard, what IP address they're connected to. So I also want to be able to go and get also real-time events from Meraki dashboard as well. So maybe up-down information, various alerts. The way you do that, again, is through a webhook. So you subscribe to the Meraki network alerts from dashboard, and it allows for real-time monitoring, but this time it's not in RAW format, it's in JSON format. So to do that, we need to give the dashboard like a template in order to actually format the data so that so Splunk knows how to receive it. To do that, if you go down to this link down the bottom, what you're going to get is this template liquid body. You simply paste it in, and that's the general format of the data that you're going to be sending into Splunk, and then Splunk is going to be able to recognize that. The other part is I need to have the authorization header. Again, it's very specific in its format, so I need the authorization keyword. But here I have the keyword, the other keyword Splunk, a space, and I variabilize the shared secret. So then when I go and have a look, go and configure the receiver for the network, I put the Splunk token in the shared secret field. I subscribe to the template, and that's the first part of creating the actual webhook. The next part is to subscribe to the alerts. So the way I do that in the alert settings, I type in the default recipient, so I could just type in webhook there, and then it'll just populate as a drop-down list of what the webhook's name is. And then on the network side, or whatever you've got configured, so it might depend a little bit on what type of infrastructure you have, I can go subscribe to those alerts. And then what it looks like is when I go and search for the Meraki, in this case, so I'm searching for Meraki and the source type, the actual webhook, I can start to visualize the data in there, or on the raw side, on the right-hand side, that's what it looks like. Just a couple more. So ThousandEyes. So ThousandEyes, here's a URL for it. What it is that the authentication is a little bit different because it's all integrated in with the ThousandEyes dashboard. But essentially what you do is you put in your credentials for ThousandEyes, and it will go get an authorization token and then put it in the ThousandEyes dashboard. So it's all automated in that respect. Again, I create a HTTP event collector. I get the token, and then when I subscribe to my tests, it looks like that on the right-hand screen. And I'm doing a ThousandEyes cloud instance, well, obviously ThousandEyes is cloud, to a Meraki cloud instance in this example. So there's a specific format of that, but essentially I put in my details. The HEC token is a drop-down list, so it's a lot more streamlined in the way that you can configure and subscribe to the actual inputs. And then what you can get here is a couple of examples on the dashboard side. So this is showing the BGP events that are happening in my network. I can select it by agent, I can select it by time, I can select it by the test name, but I can show various aspects of what is happening from my ThousandEyes tests as well. On the right-hand side is a HTTP test from some of my agents, so I can start to display what some of those attributes look like in a dashboard. But I can visualize it in the one area. And because all of this lives in Splunk, I can now see my Meraki, I can see my ThousandEyes, I can see all my Catalyst type stuff, and that's just on the infrastructure side from networking. So here, I just want to show what it might look like. So this is the search head here. And I'm searching for index equals something. So by default, it's going to try and auto-complete and help me out in what I want to search for. Now, if I search for star, that means all indexes. Probably not the most efficient way of doing a search if I've got lots and lots of data. So what I can do is specify the actual index that I want to search for. So in this case, this is my Catalyst Center HEC. I've got a particular Catalyst Center index. And what you've noticed is that the data automatically is coming up and Splunk is formatting it in fields. And I can go and have a look at any one of those particular fields, and it's going to pop up my results on the right-hand side. Now, if I want to go and add that to a particular search, it's very easy. So what I do is I'm just going to take this as a source HTTP HEC and add it to my search bar. And what I've got here, let me just share a little bit of context, is I can now go and specify just any type of text that I want. So I've typed in the word drift here, right? Couple of points. When I go and do it this particular way, it's implicit that there's an AND statement in all of these keywords. So it's index equals Catalyst Center, and its source is cat HEC, and the keyword drift. So the context here is that my Catalyst Center is configuring my network environment with SD access and templates. So from the Catalyst Center perspective or a network management perspective, I want that to be a standard operating environment. There shouldn't be any changes made outside of that environment. But by specifying the keyword drift here, which is just text somewhere in this data, there are other ways to do it, like it's an out-of-band statement. What I'm saying is that find me the devices that have been configured out of band by using a drift statement. So what happens is I can also search for, in this case, a username. So if I want to search for the username, in this case, DNAC, or my username, I can just have an OR statement, right? So I can and OR things together as well. I can now visualize that and present it in a list or visualize it in a chart. And I've just done a bar chart here. So what this is saying is all the devices that have been configured out of band over that particular time period, maybe I should go and have a look at it a little bit more. If I like it, I can go create a dashboard or add it to an existing dashboard. And then I can use that as in my existing Splunk instance. But this is what you get in the Enterprise Networking app. This is how you can use either these samples or use this data in real life. And typically what happens is that it will come up with a set of charts or a set of a pie graph. I can go and filter and go and have a look at the charts individually. Each one of these links that are actual hyperlinks. Here's where I go and configure the inputs. So here's an example of all of the inputs that we configured earlier for Catalyst Center and ICE and etc. An example of how it's easy to go and configure that particular input. And we're looking here, I think, at the endpoint page, so it drops down into a list. Again, if I go and click on a particular pie chart in this example, it goes and displays or expands that list out. And if I go and have a look at what that hyperlink looks like, that's the search that it produced. I can then go and use that data or tweak it or go and change it in some way to go and start to either create my own dashboards or tweak the existing dashboards. So it's very flexible in the way that you can go and look at data and start to visualize what the data is in your environment. So here I'm looking at the performance of ICE, which was the earlier screens. Here is the SD-WAN side of the fence where I'm looking at the site health and the link health. And again, I can go and click those links and it'll go and expand it out. So the last thing that I want to go and have a look at is IT service intelligence from Splunk. So we've got all of the data that's coming in from our existing TAs. So our Catalyst add-on, our Meraki add-on, our Thousand Eyes. And what you can start to do with this is you can start to get business visibility from a service perspective of what is happening in your environment. You can accelerate your mean time to resolution by looking at correlations of events. And I can have that proactive incident prevention coming from Splunk that I can see in my various dashboards. So this is already using the data that I'm collecting for Splunk and adding another layer in terms of services of what I've got. So ITSI is an application that you install, and then you have these content packs. And the Catalyst Center content pack was released in San Diego in Cisco Live this year. What it does, it enables us to have this site-based dependencies and KPIs to go and visualize my services. So what I'm looking at here is going to be from an infrastructure perspective. But there are other content packs that you can add in that will give you different types of views and merge it into what we see here. So in the Catalyst content pack, we can get a couple of different views. The one on the left there is the card view of what is happening over a particular time. And it's going to rearrange these cards to bring more important information to the front, right? So for example, this is happening in my lab. I've sort of injected some faults into my lab so that we can see some things that are going on. So it's saying the service from these particular sites, the ones in the orange and the red, maybe I need to have a look at them from that perspective. I can click on any of these cards and get more information as well. The lines going across, they're essentially the health over the particular time period that I'm looking at. I can also view it in the middle there like a service graph. So when I go and have a look at, say, New South Wales or WA, which are yellow or amber, I can see what that looks like in my global health. So again, this is just from an infrastructure perspective, but I can see what it looks like. And here I've clicked on global health on the right, so it shows me my health over that particular time period and the KPIs that are contributing to that particular health. So maybe let's have a look at this in action. So you can see the cards up there, they're the services. So over time, they have changed. So they'll be going up and down, but that's sort of manufactured in my lab. The KPIs, they're broken down into what the infrastructure is and site. So they're going to move those cards around. The way that I configure them is I add these services on the left, and we're going to delve into the Meraki service to see how it's done. So the content pack, it gives you all of the KPIs, so the configuration alerts, the connectivity alerts. You don't have to configure any of this stuff. This comes in the content pack itself. The device health alerts, the inside alerts, the way the thresholds are done, you can tweak them if you like. They're all what you get as to the content pack. The only part that we've configured is how to represent it in the service tree. And the way that I do that, if I go to the entities in a second, it'll show us, on the Meraki side at least, how we've done it. So I've just set up some Meraki network, and I want to have a look at those two particular labs that make up that little circle or that particular card. And that's as simple as what I've done for each one of those. So I can have a look at, in my service tree, what that sort of contributes to, if you like. If I click on any one of these, I can go and get more information about it. I can do a deep dive of what is happening for that particular service. And then it will tell me over time the KPIs that map over time, health-wise, what it looks like. If I click on the KPIs on the right-hand side, then it will expand out those particular KPIs and graph them over on that center screen. So it can start to help me see where or what time period those things have happened. If I have a look at the service information, I can see that on the access layer in Site 202 that there's a particular problem, and I can go and click on these to get more information as well. I can integrate this into systems like ServiceNow if I needed to do my automatic tickets. But here I'm just blowing up what is happening in that particular site. I get information pertaining to what my KPI has said. So again, you don't have to configure this. This is coming from Catalyst Center. This is coming from the content packs. Now, each of these are all hyperlinks as well. So in this case, because it's integrated into Catalyst Center, when I go and click on the link, it goes and directly puts me in the context of Catalyst Center and that device to see what it's like. If I had Meraki configured here, it will do a similar thing. So I can start to troubleshoot in those systems more directly if I need to. So I think that's all I had today. Really appreciate you coming and staying for the session. Please, would love your feedback as to what you thought of the session, and if there's things that you want to see in the session. We only had a certain amount of time today to go and explore things, but I just wanted to give you a taste, a quick how to configure both sides of the fence so that you can get most out of the products, and sort of where we're starting, where the integrations are starting to head. So, And please continue your education. Go see the Cisco Live stand. There's Meet the Expert on Meet the Expert tomorrow if you want to come and drop by. There's on-demand sessions, and there's the capture the flags and lab information.